Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that sounds innocent enough to be sold at your local garden centre, but has a history more twisted than a morning glory vine on steroids. We're talking about LSA, lysergic acid amide, the psychedelic cousin of LSD that's been hiding in plain sight for centuries. Not the Instagram-filtered wellness journey kind. The real, raw, ancient, occasionally terrifying kind that involves nausea, shamans, and the realization that your great-grandmother's favourite climbing flowers were technically a Schedule 3 controlled substance. So before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. A huge thanks to the viewer who suggested this topic. Seriously, your recommendations shape this channel, and I wouldn't be here without you. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Somehow, it's always 2 a.m. somewhere, and probably 3 a.m. for the person Googling "can morning glory seeds get you high right now?" The channel's also live on Spotify now, so check the link in the description if that's your vibe. Now dim those lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, get comfortable, and maybe check your garden for suspicious climbing vines. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what ancient Aztec priests were actually experiencing during their rituals? Did medieval monks accidentally trip while grinding their medicinal herbs? What does it feel like when a flower seed rewires your entire sense of reality? Could you handle 8 hours of profound cosmic revelation mixed with violent nausea and the certainty that you've made a terrible mistake? Would your body forgive you for what essentially amounts to voluntarily poisoning yourself with botany? And now, congratulations! You've just woken up in ancient Mesoamerica, clutching a handful of morning glory seeds, about to participate in a ceremony that will either grant you divine wisdom or make you vomit for the next 6 hours. Possibly both. Good luck. Let's start with the delicious irony that never gets old. You can walk into almost any garden centre in America, pick up a packet of morning glory or Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds, pay $3.99, and walk out with a naturally occurring psychedelic compound that shares nearly identical molecular structure with one of the most famous illegal substances ever synthesized. LSA, or lysergic acid amide, isn't some dark web legend or underground chemistry experiment. It's sitting right there between the petunias and the tomato seeds, wrapped in a cheerful packet with growing instructions and a sunset photo. The seeds contain compounds that, when ingested in sufficient quantities, can produce effects ranging from mild euphoria to full-blown hallucinations, spiritual revelations, and the kind of nausea that makes you question every life choice that led to their moment. And the best part? It's completely legal to buy them. You just can't eat them. Wink wink. The law says they're for ornamental purposes only, which is legal code for we know what you're going to do with these, but as long as nobody admits it out loud, we're all pretending these are for your garden. Picture yourself standing in the garden section of your local big box store on a Saturday morning. Soccer mums are comparing fertilizers. A retiree is studying seed-starting trays. An employee in an orange apron is watering the succulents. And there you are, holding a packet of heavenly blue morning glories, reading the back like it's the most fascinating thing you've ever seen. The packet cheerfully describes how these fast-growing vines will cover your fence with beautiful blue flowers all summer long. What it doesn't mention is that each seed contains approximately 0.01 milligrams of LSA, and that if you ingest somewhere between 150 and 400 seeds, depending on your body weight and tolerance, you'll spend the next 6 to 8 hours in an altered state of consciousness. The cashier scans your seeds without a second glance. You're just another gardener. Except you're not planning to plant a single one of these seeds, are you? You're going to take them home, crush them up, and conduct an amateur pharmacological experiment on yourself, using compounds that humans have been consuming for thousands of years, but that modern society has decided to classify as controlled substances unless they're in seed form, in which case they're totally fine. It's like if the government made alcohol illegal but said you could still buy grapes, and everyone just politely pretended wine didn't exist. The absurdity extends to how the seeds are marketed. Some packets explicitly state not for human consumption, which is basically a legal disclaimer that translates to "we know exactly what you're doing and we're covering our liability." Other packets say nothing at all, leaving the interpretation entirely up to you. And then there are the online vendors who advertise untreated, organic, heirloom morning glory seeds with suspiciously detailed descriptions of purity and freshness, details that matter significantly more if you're eating them than if you're planting them. The entire system operates on mutual pretense. The vendors know, the buyers know, the government knows. But as long as nobody says the quiet part out loud, the transaction remains legal. It's a bizarre loophole that's persisted for decades, surviving multiple drug wars and moral panics, simply because trying to ban ornamental plant seeds would be logistically impossible and politically ridiculous. So morning glory seeds remain on the shelves, right next to the sunflowers and zinnias, innocent and colourful, and containing enough psychoactive alkaloids to launch you into an 8-hour journey through your own consciousness. Just plant them responsibly, okay? That's what the packet says anyway. Long before Timothy Leary, Woodstock, or your college roommate's spiritual awakening, the Aztecs were getting profoundly weird with morning glory seeds. They called them ololiuqui, which sounds like a sneeze but was actually one of their most sacred plants. Aztec priests, shamans, and diviners would consume these seeds during elaborate ceremonies to commune with the gods, diagnose illnesses, find lost objects, or predict the future. Basically, they were using them as a hotline to the divine. And it wasn't recreational. This was serious spiritual business, wrapped in ritual, fasting, and prayers. The Spanish conquistadors, naturally horrified by anything that wasn't Catholicism, documented these practices with a mixture of fascination and disgust. They described natives experiencing visions, speaking in tongues, and claiming to see demons or angels, which, to the Spanish, was heresy. To the Aztecs, it was Tuesday. These weren't party drugs. They were sacraments, tools for accessing hidden knowledge that the ordinary mind couldn't reach. And for thousands of years this knowledge stayed locked in Mesoamerican culture, passed down through generations until Western science finally caught up and said, "Wait, what's actually in these seeds?" Imagine you're an Aztec priest in the 15th century. You've fasted for 3 days. You've purified yourself with steam baths and ritual cleansing. You've made offerings to the gods, copal incense, flowers, maybe a quail or two if you're feeling generous. Now you're sitting in a dark temple chamber, and someone hands you a cup containing ground ololiuqui seeds mixed with water. The mixture tastes bitter, earthy, slightly toxic, because it is. You drink it anyway, because this is your sacred duty. For the next hour, nothing much happens except your stomach starts to feel weird. Not painful yet, just unsettled, like you've eaten something your body doesn't quite recognize. Then the nausea hits, rolling through your gut in waves. You've been here before, so you know this is part of the process. The purging, your body rejecting the physical to make room for the spiritual. You might vomit, you might not. Either way, you sit with the discomfort, breathing through it, trusting the process. And then, slowly, the world begins to shift. The darkness of the temple becomes alive, textured, breathing. Shadows move with intention. The stone walls seem to pulse with ancient energy. When you close your eyes, you see patterns, geometric, organic, constantly flowing like water made of light. Your normal sense of self, the boundaries between you and everything else, begin to dissolve. This is when the gods speak. Not in words exactly, more like feelings, images, knowing things you didn't know a moment ago. You might see visions of the future, or the location of stolen property, or the spiritual cause of someone's illness. You might encounter entities, gods, ancestors, spirits, who communicate through symbol and emotion rather than language. The experience is profound, overwhelming, and completely real in a way that transcends normal perception. This isn't fantasy or imagination. To you, this is direct contact with the divine, mediated through sacred plants that the gods themselves provided. The Spanish missionaries who witnessed these ceremonies didn't understand. They saw people writhing, vomiting, speaking in strange languages, claiming to see things that weren't there, and concluded it must be the work of the devil. They tried to stamp it out, burning plants, punishing practitioners, forcibly converting populations. But the knowledge survived, passed down in secret, preserved by indigenous communities who understood what the colonizers never would, that these seeds weren't drugs or poisons or devil's tools. They were keys, carefully guarded, used with reverence and intention, opening doors to realms the ordinary mind could never access. The Aztecs didn't discover Ololuqui by accident. They discovered it through generations of careful observation, experimentation, and spiritual practice. And they knew something that modern recreational users often forget. Respect the plant, respect the experience, or suffer the consequences. Because the seeds don't care about your intentions. They'll show you truth whether you're ready or not. Here's where it gets chemically interesting, and by interesting, I mean deeply concerning if you're planning to ingest this. LSA, or lysergic acid amide, is what chemists call an ergoline alkaloid. If that sounds familiar, it's because its more famous relative, LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, is also an ergoline alkaloid. They share the same basic molecular backbone, which is why they produce similar effects: altered perception, visual distortions, profound emotional experiences, and the unsettling feeling that your houseplant is judging you. But here's the catch. LSA is significantly weaker than LSD, and it comes with a delightful bonus side effect profile that includes nausea, vasoconstriction, your blood vessels tightening up like a stressed out garden hose, muscle tension, and general physical discomfort that makes you wonder why anyone would voluntarily do this twice. LSD was synthesized in 1938 by Albert Hoffman, who was actually trying to create a circulatory and respiratory stimulant, not a consciousness-expanding miracle. LSA, meanwhile, had been sitting in seeds for millennia, waiting for someone to figure out what it was. The molecular difference? LSD has two ethyl groups attached where LSA has simpler amide groups. That tiny chemical tweak makes LSD far more potent, longer lasting, and crucially, way less likely to make you puke your guts out. Let's break down what's actually happening in your brain when LSA enters the picture. Both LSA and LSD are serotonergic psychedelics, meaning they primarily work by binding to serotonin receptors, particularly the 5-HT2A receptor. Serotonin is one of your brain's main neurotransmitters, involved in mood, perception, cognition, and basically everything that makes you feel like a functional human. When LSA molecules flood your system and latch onto these receptors, they don't just occupy them, they activate them in unusual ways, creating patterns of neural activity that don't normally occur. Your brain, confused by these irregular signals, starts interpreting sensory information differently. Colours become more vivid. Patterns emerge where none existed. Your sense of time stretches or compresses. Thoughts that normally stay separate start connecting in weird, novel ways. It's like your brain's operating system has been temporarily hacked, and everything's running on experimental software that hasn't been properly debugged. But here's where LSA diverges from its more famous cousin. While LSD is relatively selective in which receptors it activates, LSA is messier. It hits serotonin receptors, sure, but it also affects dopamine receptors and has activity at various other binding sites throughout your nervous system. This lack of selectivity is why the physical side effects are so pronounced. When LSA molecules start messing with receptors that control smooth muscle contraction, the muscles in your blood vessels, your digestive tract, your airways, you get vasoconstriction, nausea, and that general feeling of physical wrongness that characterizes the LSA experience. Your body, quite reasonably, recognizes that something foreign and potentially harmful is circulating through your bloodstream and tries to reject it. Hence the vomiting, the cramping, the overall sense that you've poisoned yourself, because you have, just mildly and temporarily. The potency difference between LSA and LSD is also crucial. A typical LSD dose is measured in micrograms, millionths of a gram. 100 micrograms, about the weight of a grain of sand, is enough for a full psychedelic experience. LSA, by contrast, requires milligrams, thousands of times more material. To get enough LSA for an active dose, you need to consume hundreds of seeds, which means you're also consuming hundreds of seeds worth of other alkaloids, plant matter, and compounds your body really doesn't want. It's the difference between taking a precisely measured pharmaceutical and eating a handful of raw plant material that happens to contain the compound you're after, along with everything else the plant produces. LSD is refined, pure, predictable. LSA is crude, inconsistent, and comes with baggage. Both can take you to similar places, but the journey with LSA is bumpier, less comfortable, and significantly more likely to involve a toilet, which, in fairness, is probably why it never became as culturally significant as LSD. Nobody writes songs about the psychedelic that makes you vomit for 3 hours before the good part starts. If LSA were a drug dealer, Morning Glory seeds would be its cover story. They're everywhere. Hardware stores, garden centres, online seed catalogues. You can buy them by the pound if you want, and nobody asks questions because officially you're growing a charming climbing vine to decorate your fence. Unofficially, certain people on certain corners of the internet know that if you ingest somewhere between 50 to 500 seeds, depending on the variety and your body weight, you're in for a 6 to 8 hour experience that sits somewhere between mildly pleasant and why did I do this to myself? The most common species is Ipomoea tricolor, particularly varieties like Heavenly Blue, Pearly Gates, and Flying Saucers, names that sound like they were chosen by someone who absolutely knew what these seeds were capable of. The problem is consistency. Not all Morning Glory seeds are created equal. Some are coated with fungicides, pesticides, or other chemicals to prevent exactly this kind of recreational use. Eating those is an express ticket to poisoning, not enlightenment. And even untreated seeds vary wildly in potency, depending on when they were harvested, how they were stored, and sheer dumb luck. So you're playing Russian roulette with botany, and the prize is either a pleasant afternoon or 12 hours of regret. You've decided to try Morning Glory seeds. Maybe you read about them online. Maybe a friend mentioned them. Maybe you're just curious about the seeds you've been walking past in the garden section for years, without realizing what they contained. So you buy a packet, let's say Heavenly Blue, the most popular variety. You take it home, open the packet, and pour the seeds into your palm. They're small, angular, roughly triangular, with a hard brown coating that looks and feels like tiny chips of wood. There are maybe 200 seeds in the packet. According to your research, you'll need somewhere between 150 and 300 for a proper experience, depending on potency and your sensitivity. The seeds smell faintly earthy, botanical, not particularly appetizing. You've read about extraction methods, but you've decided to go the simple route. Just chew them and swallow. How bad could it be? Here's where things get real. You pop a handful of seeds into your mouth and start chewing. The taste hits immediately. Bitter, astringent, with an oily texture that coats your tongue and teeth. It's not the worst thing you've ever tasted, but it's definitely in the bottom 10. The seeds are hard to chew, requiring significant jaw work to break them down, and the more you chew, the more the bitterness intensifies. Some people describe it as tasting like dirt mixed with chemicals, which is both accurate and unhelpful. You're about 20 seeds in, and your mouth is already rebelling. Your saliva has turned into a bitter, fibrous sludge. Your gag reflex is threatening mutiny. But you push through because you're committed now, and quitting at 20 seeds would be pointless. You chase each handful with water, which helps slightly, but the taste lingers, settling into your taste buds, like an unwelcome houseguest who refuses to leave. 30 minutes later, you've consumed roughly 200 seeds, and your stomach feels heavy, full of plant matter that's sitting there like a lead weight. Your mouth still tastes terrible despite multiple attempts to rinse it out. Now comes the waiting. You've read that onset takes anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours, so you settle in, maybe put on some music, try to relax. An hour passes. Your stomach starts feeling weird. Not painful yet, just unsettled, gurgling, making strange noises. You start wondering if the seeds are working, or if you just gave yourself indigestion. Then, slowly, you notice things shifting. Colours seem slightly brighter, sounds have more texture, your body feels different, heavier or lighter, or just different. And then the nausea arrives, rolling through your gut like a slow, inevitable wave. It's not sudden or violent, it's gradual, building, persistent. Your stomach is telling you very clearly that it's unhappy with your recent decisions. You lie down, hoping that will help. It doesn't. The nausea intensifies, and you're faced with a choice. Fight it, or surrender to it. Some people say letting yourself vomit helps, that it's a purge that clears the way for the rest of the experience. Others say it just makes you feel worse and doesn't reduce the effects. You're too nauseous to care about philosophy right now. You just want it to stop. And this is the morning glory experience in a nutshell. Botanical Russian roulette, where the only certainty is that you'll spend the first few hours questioning your judgment, while your body tries to reject the very thing you voluntarily put into it. The seeds are legal, accessible, and technically natural, but none of that makes them pleasant. They're a reminder that just because something comes from a plant doesn't mean it's gentle, safe, or enjoyable. Nature isn't trying to give you a good time, nature is indifferent. And morning glory seeds, sold cheerfully next to the marigolds, are perfectly happy to teach you that lesson the hard way. If morning glory seeds are LSA's entry-level option, Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds are the advanced class. Scientifically known as Argyrea nervosa, these seeds pack significantly more LSA per seed, meaning you need far fewer to achieve effects, but you also get a far more intense experience. Where you might need 200 morning glory seeds, you'd only need 4 to 8 baby woodrose seeds. Sounds convenient, right? Wrong. Because Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds come with an even more brutal side effect profile. The nausea is legendary. We're talking full-body, soul-crushing nausea that hits before the psychedelic effects even begin, and sometimes last for hours. Experienced users describe it as purging, a shamanic term for violently expelling everything in your stomach as part of the spiritual process. Others just call it the worst decision I ever made in a Whole Foods parking lot. The seeds themselves are large, brown and fuzzy, looking less like a drug and more like something you'd find in a potpourri bowl. But don't let their appearance fool you. These seeds are potent, unpredictable, and have ruined more than a few I'm just going to microdose and chill evenings. You're holding a Hawaiian baby woodrose seed in your hand. It's roughly the size of a small pea, covered in a fuzzy brown coating that feels almost soft like velvet. Underneath that fuzz is a hard, woody shell, and inside that shell is a kernel containing concentrated LSA, along with various other alkaloids. This single seed contains roughly the same amount of LSA as 20 to 30 morning glory seeds, which means if you take 6 of these, you're getting the equivalent of something like 150 to 200 morning glories, but concentrated into a much smaller package. The math seems appealing. Fewer seeds to choke down, less plant matter in your stomach, same effects. But the reality is more complicated, because concentration doesn't eliminate side effects, it often intensifies them. First step, preparation. Most guides recommend removing the fuzzy outer coating because it supposedly contains compounds that contribute to nausea. You scrape it off with a knife or sandpaper, revealing the smooth, hard shell underneath. Some people also remove the shell itself, extracting just the inner kernel, which is pale and oily. Others skip this step and just eat the whole seed. There's no consensus on which method is better, which should tell you something about the consistency of this experience. You've decided to remove the fuzz but keep the shell. Now you need to decide, chew them or swallow them whole. Chewing breaks down the seed and potentially increases absorption, but also releases the full flavour, which is astoundingly bitter. Imagine chewing on wood chips soaked in chemicals. Swallowing them whole is easier on your taste buds but might result in uneven absorption. You choose to chew because you want this over with quickly. The moment the first seed cracks between your teeth, you understand why people warn about the taste. It's not just bitter, it's aggressively unpleasant, with a chemical, almost numbing quality that coats your entire mouth. Your tongue feels slightly fuzzy. Your saliva turns into a thick, bitter paste. You force yourself to chew thoroughly, breaking the seed down into small pieces before swallowing with water. 1 down, 5 to go. By the third seed, your mouth is staging a full rebellion. Your gag reflex is active and angry. The taste has permeated every taste bud, and drinking water just spreads it around rather than washing it away. You power through, finishing all 6 seeds over the course of 10 minutes, followed by aggressive teeth brushing that does absolutely nothing to eliminate the lingering bitterness. Now you wait. Hawaiian baby woodrose has a reputation for hitting harder and faster than morning glories. Within 30 to 45 minutes you start feeling it, a heaviness in your limbs, a slight shift in perception, and, oh yes, there's the nausea. It arrives like a freight train, sudden and overwhelming, turning your stomach inside out. You lie down, but lying down makes it worse. You sit up, but sitting up makes it worse. You try walking, breathing exercises, ginger tea, anti-nausea medication, nothing touches it. For the next 2 to 3 hours, you exist in a state of profound physical misery, while your mind slowly begins to fracture and reform. The walls are breathing, your thoughts are spiraling into strange philosophical territory, and every sensation is amplified, which unfortunately includes the sensation of your stomach trying to evacuate itself. Some people vomit violently and feel better afterward. Others just suffer through wave after wave of nausea without release, trapped in limbo between purging and enduring. Hawaiian baby woodrose doesn't ease you into the experience. It grabs you by the throat, shakes you around, and only lets go once it's satisfied you've learned your lesson. And the lesson is usually, respect the seed, or the seed will absolutely humble you. So you've got your seeds. Now what? Well, if you're the kind of person who Googles how to extract LSA, congratulations, you've just entered a rabbit hole of amateur chemistry that ranges from mildly sketchy to this is definitely how people end up on watch lists. The most common method is called a cold water extraction, which sounds scientific but is really just soaking crushed seeds in water, filtering out the plant material, and drinking what's left. A murky liquid that tastes like regret mixed with lawn clippings. Some people swear by it. Others say it does nothing except make you gag. Then there's the ethanol extraction, where you soak the seeds in high-proof alcohol, let it sit for a few days, strain it, and evaporate the alcohol to leave behind a concentrated residue. This method supposedly increases potency and reduces nausea, but it also requires you to handle flammable solvents in your kitchen like a discount Walter White, which is a terrible idea for about 17 different reasons. And let's not forget the people who just chew the seeds raw, which is the most straightforward method, but also guarantees you'll be tasting bitter, fibrous plant matter for hours while your stomach stages a full-scale rebellion. Every online forum has a different best method, and every method has passionate defenders who insist theirs is the only way that works. Spoiler alert, they all work, and they all suck in different ways. Let's walk through a cold water extraction step by step, because if you're going to make questionable decisions, you might as well make them with proper technique. You've got your seeds, let's say 200 morning glory seeds, verified untreated. First, you need to grind them. A coffee grinder works best, pulsing the seeds into a coarse powder. The grinding releases the LSA from inside the seeds, making it more accessible for extraction. You pour the ground seeds into a jar and add distilled water. Some guides say 200 milliliters, others say more. The exact amount is apparently subject to personal preference and mystical intuition. You seal the jar and place it in the refrigerator. Not the freezer, the refrigerator. Temperature matters because LSA degrades in heat and light, so you're trying to keep everything cold and dark. Now you wait. Some guides say wait 4 hours, others say 12, some say shake it every hour, others say don't shake it at all. The lack of consensus should be your first clue that this is more art than science. After your chosen waiting period, you strain the mixture through a coffee filter or cheesecloth, separating the liquid from the seed mush. What remains is a cloudy, slightly yellowish water that contains, theoretically, most of the LSA from the seeds along with significantly less plant matter. You're supposed to drink this. The taste is described variously as earthy, bitter, like dirty water, and absolutely foul. Some people add lemon juice, claiming the acidity helps convert inactive iso-LSA into active LSA, a process called isomerization. Whether this actually works is hotly debated. The chemistry suggests it might, but home extraction conditions are so imprecise that it's impossible to know if you're actually achieving isomerization or just making your nasty seed water taste citrusy. You drink it anyway, quickly, chasing it with something strongly flavoured to mask the taste. Then you wait again, this time for the effects to kick in. The cold water extraction is supposed to reduce nausea because you're consuming less plant material, but in practice many people report that it doesn't help much. You still get nauseated, you still feel physically uncomfortable. You've just added several hours of kitchen chemistry to the process. The ethanol extraction is even more involved. You grind the seeds, place them in a jar with high-proof ethanol. Everclear is popular because it's nearly pure alcohol, and let it sit in a dark place for several days, shaking occasionally. The alcohol pulls the LSA out of the plant material more efficiently than water. After a few days, you strain out the seeds and are left with an alcohol solution containing LSA. Now comes the sketchy part, evaporation. You need to get rid of the alcohol to concentrate the LSA. Some people just leave the jar open and let it evaporate naturally, which takes forever. Others use gentle heat, like placing the jar in warm water, which is faster but also dangerous because you're heating flammable alcohol in your kitchen. Some guides recommend adding an acid like citric acid to improve stability. Others suggest adding base compounds. The deeper you go into extraction chemistry, the more you realize you're conducting experiments with controlled substances using equipment from Target and information from strangers on Reddit. And when you finally get your concentrated extract, a brownish, sticky residue that looks like tree sap, You still have no idea how potent it is, how pure it is, or whether you have actually achieved anything beyond making your kitchen smell like a distillery. But you've come this far, so you dissolve the residue in a small amount of water and drink it, accepting that you're basically dosing yourself with a mystery compound of unknown potency. Welcome to DIY psychopharmacology, where nothing is standardized, everything is a guess, and the only certainty is that you probably should have just bought a houseplant instead. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or more accurately the churning, twisting, bile-filled sensation in your stomach that accompanies nearly every LSA experience. The nausea isn't a side effect, it's the defining characteristic. Unlike LSD, which can be relatively gentle on the body, LSA comes with a gastrointestinal storm that feels like your internal organs are staging a protest. It usually hits within the first hour, right when you're starting to feel the initial mental effects, and it can last anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. Some people describe it as mild discomfort. Others describe it as the worst stomach pain they've ever experienced, followed by waves of vomiting that make them swear off seeds, plants, and nature in general forever. The nausea is thought to be caused by the other alkaloids present in the seeds, compounds like ergine, isoergine, and various other plant chemicals that your body really doesn't want inside it. Your digestive system recognizes these as toxins and tries to expel them as quickly as possible, which means you're not just getting high, you're getting poisoned, mildly, and your body knows it. Some experienced users treat this as part of the ritual, a necessary purge before the spiritual experience begins. Others just pop anti-nausea medication and hope for the best, which sometimes works and sometimes just delays the inevitable. You're 90 minutes into your LSA experience. The seeds are definitely working. You can tell because the walls are starting to breathe gently, colours seem more saturated, and your thoughts are beginning to spiral into strange looping patterns. But none of that matters right now because your stomach has decided it hates you. The nausea started subtly, just a faint queasiness that you hoped would pass. It didn't pass. It grew, building from mild discomfort to active distress to full-blown agony. Your stomach feels bloated, pressurized, like something inside is expanding and pushing against your organs. There's a hot, acidic sensation creeping up your esophagus. Your mouth is producing excess saliva, that telltale warning sign that vomiting is imminent. You're lying on your bathroom floor because this is where you live now. The tiles are cool against your cheek, providing minimal comfort. You've already vomited once, a violent expulsion that left you shaking and sweating, but it didn't help. The nausea persists, rolling through you in waves that peak and recede but never fully disappear. The worst part is that there's nothing you can do to make it stop. You've tried everything your pre-trip research suggested. Ginger tea, anti-nausea medication, breathing exercises, lying in different positions, applying pressure to acupressure points on your wrists. None of it works. The nausea is immune to intervention, a force of nature that must simply be endured. You curl into a fetal position, arms wrapped around your stomach, riding out each wave like a storm at sea. Time behaves strangely, minutes feel like hours, and hours compress into moments. You've lost track of how long you've been on this bathroom floor. Could be 30 minutes, could be 3 hours. Your perception is too scrambled to tell. Between waves of nausea, you experience moments of clarity where you wonder why anyone would voluntarily do this. The psychedelic effects are happening, you're aware of them, seeing subtle visual distortions, feeling emotional shifts, but they're background noise to the main event, which is your body's furious rejection of everything you've put in it. Some people report that the nausea ends suddenly, like a switch being flipped. One moment they're dying, the next they feel completely fine and can finally enjoy the rest of the experience. Others aren't so lucky. the nausea persists for hours, tainting the entire trip with physical misery. You're starting to suspect you fall into the second category. Around the 3-hour mark, the nausea finally begins to ease, not disappearing but becoming tolerable enough that you can move without triggering another wave. You carefully extract yourself from the bathroom floor, rinse your mouth for the 15th time, and make your way back to your bedroom. Your stomach still feels tender, unsettled, like it's recovering from food poisoning, which, in a way, it is. You've poisoned yourself with plant alkaloids, your body fought back, and now both of you are exhausted from the battle. The rest of the trip proceeds in relative peace, but you'll never forget those first 3 hours. Every future conversation about LSA will begin with the nausea, because there's no way around it. The nausea isn't a bug in the LSA experience, it's a feature, and it's one that ensures most people try these seeds exactly once before, deciding that maybe enlightenment isn't worth hugging a toilet for half a day. If the nausea wasn't enough, LSA also causes vasoconstriction, which is a fancy way of saying your blood vessels tighten up and restrict blood flow. This manifests as cold hands and feet, muscle cramps, a feeling of tightness in your chest, and sometimes numbness or tingling in your extremities. It's not dangerous in most cases, but it's deeply uncomfortable, like your entire circulatory system decided to clench up and refuse to cooperate. In extreme cases, people report severe leg cramps that last for hours, or a sensation that their limbs are being squeezed by invisible bands. This happens because LSA, like other ergot alkaloids, affects serotonin receptors that also control smooth muscle contraction in blood vessels. The same mechanism that causes hallucinations also causes your arteries to constrict. Fun, right? Some people try to counteract this with vasodilators, substances that relax blood vessels like ibuprofen, ginger, or even small amounts of alcohol. Others just suffer through it, curled up under blankets, massaging their legs and wondering why they didn't just stick with weed. The vasoconstriction usually peaks around the same time as the nausea, meaning the first few hours of an LSA trip are basically your body screaming at you while your mind tries to have a transcendent experience. It's like trying to meditate while someone punches you in the stomach. You're 2 hours in, past the worst of the nausea, and now you're noticing something else. Your feet are freezing. You're under 3 blankets. The room temperature is perfectly comfortable, but your feet feel like they've been packed in ice. You try wiggling your toes to restore circulation. It doesn't help. Your fingers are similarly cold, the tips feeling numb and slightly tingly. You make fists, release them. Make fists again, trying to force blood into your extremities. The tingling persists. Then your legs start cramping. It begins as a mild tightness in your calves, the kind of sensation you'd get after a long run. But you haven't been running. You've been lying in bed for 2 hours, barely moving. The tightness intensifies, muscles contracting involuntarily, squeezing and releasing in painful spasms. You try to stretch, pointing your toes and then flexing them back, but the cramps don't care about your stretching. They're on their own schedule. The chest tightness is perhaps the most unsettling symptom. There's a sensation of pressure, like someone's wrapped a band around your ribcage and is slowly tightening it. It's not painful exactly, just restrictive. Each breath feels slightly more effortful than it should be. Your heart rate seems elevated, though you're not sure if that's the vasoconstriction or just anxiety about the chest tightness creating a feedback loop. You remind yourself that this is a known side effect, that thousands of people have experienced this and survived, that vasoconstriction from LSA is uncomfortable, but not medically dangerous unless you have pre-existing heart conditions, which you don't. The rational part of your brain understands this. The part of your brain that's currently tripping and hyper-aware of every bodily sensation is less convinced. Every twinge, every cramp, every odd feeling gets amplified and scrutinized. Is this normal vasoconstriction? Or is something actually wrong? You can't tell. Your perception is too altered to trust your own judgment. You try the recommended remedies, ibuprofen, which is supposed to have mild vasodilating properties, a hot shower to encourage blood flow to the extremities, gentle exercise, walking around your room, doing light stretches. Some of it helps marginally. The hot shower in particular provides temporary relief, the warmth penetrating your cold fingers and toes, tricking your body into relaxing slightly. But the moment you step out of the shower and dry off, the cold returns, the tightness returns, the cramps return. It's like your circulatory system is stuck in a defensive mode, constricted and suspicious, refusing to return to normal until the LSA has fully cleared your system, which won't be for another 4 to 5 hours. So you resign yourself to discomfort, pile on more blankets, and try to focus on the mental aspects of the experience rather than the physical. But it's hard to have profound spiritual insights when your legs are cramping and your fingers are numb. The vasoconstriction is a constant nagging reminder that your body is not happy with your choices. LSA might open doors in your mind, but it slams doors in your arteries, and you're stuck waiting for someone to unlock them again. Assuming you survive the nausea and vasoconstriction, you eventually reach the part people actually want, the psychedelic effects. LSA visuals are subtle compared to LSD or psilocybin. Don't expect kaleidoscopic fractals or entities made of light. Instead, you get what users describe as a wavy or breathing effect. Surfaces seem to gently pulse. Colours become slightly more vibrant, and patterns might shift or shimmer if you stare at them long enough. It's less the walls are melting and more the walls are subtly inhaling and exhaling, and it's kind of weird but also kind of beautiful. Closed-eye visuals are often more pronounced. Swirling colours, geometric patterns and dreamlike imagery that feels more organic and flowing than the crisp digital patterns of LSD. Some people report seeing plants, vines, or natural forms, which makes sense given that you're basically ingesting concentrated plant chemicals. The headspace is where LSA really shines, or terrifies, depending on your perspective. Users describe profound thoughts, emotional introspection, and a sense of connection to nature or the universe. Some people have spiritual revelations, others have existential crises, and some just lie there feeling slightly weird and vaguely philosophical, while their houseplants continue to breathe ominously in the corner. You're finally past the worst of the physical symptoms. Your stomach has settled into uneasy tolerance. The vasoconstriction is still present but manageable. And now, 4 hours into the experience, you're able to actually pay attention to what's happening in your perception. You're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and the ceiling is moving. Not dramatically, it's not morphing into faces or spiraling into infinity. It's just breathing, expanding slightly, contracting slightly, in a slow, rhythmic pulse that matches no pattern you can identify. You know, intellectually, that the ceiling is not actually moving. It's a static surface made of painted drywall. But your visual cortex, currently flooded with LSA, is interpreting the subtle shadows and textures as motion. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The breathing effect spreads to the walls, the curtains, even the blanket covering your legs. Everything has developed a gentle, organic quality, as if your entire room has become a living thing, quietly respiring while you observe. Colours are different too. Not wildly different, you're not seeing colours that don't exist. But the colours that are present seem more saturated, more meaningful somehow. The blue of your curtains looks impossibly blue, holding your attention in a way it never has before. You notice subtle gradations of shade, the way light hits different folds of fabric, creating a complex landscape of colour variation that you've looked at 1,000 times but never really seen. It's not that the curtains have changed. You've changed. Your perception has been temporarily rewired, allowing you to notice details your brain normally filters out as unimportant. You close your eyes, and the visuals become more elaborate. Against the dark backdrop of your eyelids, colours swirl and flow. Deep purples, greens, golds, all moving in liquid patterns that feel organic and alive. You see shapes that might be plants, or might be abstract forms, or might be the visual representation of your own brain activity. It's impossible to tell. The imagery is dreamlike, shifting too quickly to grasp, dissolving the moment you try to focus on it. The headspace is the real revelation, though. Your thoughts have become unusually fluid, making connections between ideas that normally stay separate. You think about your childhood, and that thought branches into a reflection on the nature of memory, which spirals into wondering whether your memories are even accurate or just stories you've told yourself so many times they've become real. This thought doesn't distress you. It fascinates you. Everything feels significant, meaningful, like you're seeing patterns in reality that are always there but usually invisible. You're not thinking faster exactly. You're thinking differently, more associatively, less linearly. Ideas emerge fully formed from nowhere, hang in your consciousness for a moment, then dissolve back into the background. Some of them feel profound in the moment, deep truths about existence, relationships, or the human condition. Others are just weird, random thoughts like, what if trees have thoughts, but they're too slow for us to detect, or everything is just vibrations pretending to be solid? You don't know if any of this is actually meaningful or if it's just the drugs talking. Probably the latter. But in this moment, lying here watching your ceiling breathe and contemplating the nature of consciousness, it all feels real and important. The visuals might be subtle compared to other psychedelics, but the shift in perspective is just as radical. LSA doesn't show you new worlds, it shows you this world, slightly tilted, slightly stranger, asking you to look closer and see what you've been missing. One of the most important things to know about LSA is that once you're on the ride, you're on it until it's over. The effects typically last 6 to 8 hours, sometimes longer, with a gradual come down that can stretch into the next day. There's no off switch, no emergency exit, no I've changed my mind, please make it stop option. If you're 2 hours in and hating every second of it, congratulations, you've got 6 more hours to go. The timeline usually breaks down like this: 30 minutes to an hour for onset, during which you'll feel increasing nausea and the first hints of altered perception. Then 2 to 4 hours of peak effects, where the visuals, emotional intensity and physical discomfort are all maxed out. After that, a gradual decline over the next 3 to 4 hours, where the psychedelic effect fade but you're left feeling drained, spacey, and possibly still a little nauseous. Sleep is often difficult during this period because your mind is still slightly altered and your body is still processing the alkaloids. The next day, many people report feeling exhausted, emotionally raw, or mentally foggy, what some call a hangover, though it's less about alcohol toxicity and more about your brain trying to recalibrate after being chemically scrambled for 8 hours. You took the seeds at 2 in the afternoon, thinking that would give you plenty of time to experience the effects and still be mostly normal by bedtime. That was optimistic. It's now 10 at night, 8 hours later, and while you're definitely past the peak, you're nowhere near sober. The intense visuals have faded to subtle traces. The profound thoughts have mellowed into a general sense of being slightly disconnected from reality. But you're still altered, still not yourself. Your body feels heavy and exhausted, like you've been physically active all day even though you've barely moved. Your mind is tired but also weirdly alert, unable to fully shut down. Sleep seems impossible. You lie in bed, eyes closed, and your thoughts continue racing, looping, making connections you don't particularly want to make right now because you're exhausted and just want to sleep. The come down from LSA isn't sharp. It's a slow, gradual fade that can feel endless when all you want is to return to baseline. Around hour 6, you notice the effect starting to lessen. The breathing walls become less pronounced. Colours return to normal. The emotional intensity begins to dial back, but it's not a clean transition. You oscillate between feeling almost sober and then suddenly noticing you're still definitely altered. It's like your brain is trying to return to normal function, but keeps stumbling, needing to rest before trying again. By hour 7, you're mostly functional, but still spacey, still slightly off. Having conversation would be challenging. Operating machinery would be dangerous. Even simple tasks like making food or responding to text require more cognitive effort than usual. The next morning arrives, and you've managed maybe 3 or 4 hours of fitful sleep. You wake up feeling strange. Not hungover in the traditional sense, no headache, no dehydration, but definitely not well. Your body feels depleted, like someone drained your batteries overnight. Your muscles are sore, particularly your legs, residual effects from the vasoconstriction and cramping. Your mind is foggy, thoughts moving slowly through thick mud. You're emotionally sensitive. Small things feel overwhelming, and you find yourself tearing up at a commercial, which is not normal behaviour for you. This is the LSA afterglow, though afterglow seems like too positive a term for what amounts to a mild hangover from consciousness alteration. Some people love this phase, finding beauty in the emotional vulnerability and the lingering sense of connection to the experience. Others, probably most others, just want to feel normal again and resent that LSA is still affecting them a full 12 hours after ingestion. The lesson becomes clear. LSA is not a quick experience. It's not something you can do on a work night or before any commitments. It requires clearing an entire day, plus the next morning, to safely experience and recover from. 8 hours of active effects, several more hours of come down, then a recovery day where you're technically functional but operating at reduced capacity. That's the time commitment you're signing up for when you eat those seeds. There's no fast forwarding through the difficult parts. No pausing when it gets too intense. You've made your choice, swallowed the seeds, and now you're committed to seeing it through to the end, however long and uncomfortable that might be. Time becomes non-negotiable, flowing at its own pace regardless of how ready you are to be done. And somewhere around hour 7, as you lie in bed exhausted but unable to sleep, still slightly tripping and deeply regretting your decisions, you make a mental note. If you ever do this again, and that's a big if, you're clearing your entire weekend. If you've done any research into psychedelics, you've heard the mantra, set and setting. Set refers to your mindset, your emotional state, expectations and mental preparation. Setting refers to your physical environment, where you are, who you're with, and what's around you. With LSA, this matters even more than usual, because the physical discomfort means you need a safe, comfortable space where you can ride out the nausea without panicking. Taking LSA at a party, in public, or anywhere you might need to function like a normal human being is a recipe for disaster. You need a quiet, familiar space where you can lie down, access a bathroom easily, and not worry about being interrupted or judged. Most experienced users recommend being alone or with one trusted friend, in a room with soft lighting, comfortable blankets, and access to water and light snacks. Music is important too. Many people find that gentle, ambient music helps guide the experience, while harsh or chaotic sounds can trigger anxiety. Nature is often recommended as an ideal setting, assuming you're past the nausea phase and can actually move without vomiting. Being outside, surrounded by trees and plants, can feel deeply meaningful when you're on a plant-based psychedelic, but again, only if you're not spending the first 3 hours hugging a toilet. You've prepared your space carefully because you've read enough horror stories to know that environment matters. Your bedroom has been transformed into what you hope is a sanctuary. You've cleaned it thoroughly because clutter and mess can become overwhelming and anxiety-inducing when you're tripping. You've arranged soft lighting, a couple of lamps with warm bulbs, positioned to create gentle illumination without harsh shadows. The overhead fluorescent light is off because you know from research that bright, artificial light can feel oppressive and uncomfortable during a psychedelic experience. Your bed is made with fresh sheets and piled with pillows and blankets in various weights, so you can adjust your temperature as needed, given that vasoconstriction will make you feel cold even when you're not. Within arm's reach, you've placed a water bottle, some ginger candies for nausea, crackers in case you feel like eating later, and your phone on silent mode but accessible for emergencies. The bathroom is 5 steps away, crucial, because you know there's a strong possibility you'll be spending quality time there in a few hours. Music selection took you longer than you'd like to admit. You've created a playlist specifically for this experience, carefully curating tracks that are ambient, instrumental, and emotionally neutral. Nothing too energetic or chaotic, nothing with aggressive lyrics, nothing that might trigger anxiety or dark thoughts. You've included artists like Brian Eno, Tycho, and Boards of Canada, electronic music that's textured and immersive but not overwhelming. You've also included some nature sounds, rainfall, forest ambience, ocean waves, as alternatives if the music starts feeling like too much. The playlist is 8 hours long, exactly matching the expected duration of the experience. You've thought of everything, or at least you hope you have. You've told one trusted friend about your plans, someone who won't judge you, and who's agreed to be available via text if you need support, though you're hoping you won't. But here's what you didn't anticipate. Even in your carefully prepared sanctuary, things can still go wrong. 3 hours in, during the peak nausea phase, you discover that your carefully chosen ambient music sounds absolutely terrible. Every note feels like it's scraping against your consciousness in an unpleasant way. You turn it off, preferring silence, but then the silence feels too heavy, too empty, amplifying every stomach gurgle and body sensation. You try the nature sounds. The rainfall sounds nice initially, but then starts to sound artificial and repetitive, like you're trapped in a loop. Nothing is quite right. The lighting, which seemed perfect before, now feels too bright in some corners and too dark in others, creating shadows that are slightly unsettling. The room temperature is a constant source of frustration. You're cold because of vasoconstriction, so you pile on blankets, but then you feel trapped and overheated, so you throw them off, but then you're cold again. It's a comfort paradox that has no solution. Around hour 5, past the worst physical symptoms, you finally achieve some equilibrium. You find a lighting situation that works, one lamp on, everything else off. You find a blanket configuration that's tolerable. You settle on a single ambient album on low volume that provides gentle background without demanding attention. And you realize that despite all your preparation, despite creating what should have been the perfect environment, the experience still challenged you in ways you couldn't have predicted. Because set and setting matter, but they're not magic. They can't eliminate the discomfort of LSA. They can only provide a stable foundation from which to endure it. Your carefully prepared bedroom didn't prevent the nausea, the vasoconstriction, or the difficult moments. But it did give you a safe space to fall apart without consequence, and that's ultimately what matters. When you're lying on your bathroom floor at 3 a.m., violently nauseated and questioning your life choices, the fact that you're in your own bathroom, in your own home, with nobody watching or judging, is the difference between a challenging experience and a genuinely traumatic one. Set and setting can't control the trip, but they can contain it, and sometimes that's enough. Here's the fascinating legal paradox of LSA. The compound itself is controlled in many countries, including the United States, where it's listed as a Schedule III substance. That means possession of pure LSA is illegal. However, the seeds that contain LSA are completely legal to buy, sell, and possess, as long as they're marketed as ornamental plants or garden supplies, not for human consumption. It's the same legal loophole that allows salvia, kratom, and various research chemicals to exist in a weird quasi-legal limbo. The law essentially says, we know these seeds contain a controlled substance, but we're going to pretend you're buying them to grow pretty flowers, and as long as you also pretend that's what you're doing, we won't arrest you. Of course, the moment you prepare the seeds for ingestion, crushing them, extracting them, or openly admitting you plan to eat them, you've technically crossed into illegal territory. In practice, law enforcement doesn't care. You're not going to get raided for buying morning glory seeds at Home Depot. But if you're caught with jars of extracted LSA, or openly selling seeds for consumption, that's a different story. The result is that LSA exists in a strange cultural space where everyone knows what it's for, nobody officially acknowledges it, and the entire system operates on plausible deniability. Imagine you're a law enforcement officer trying to enforce LSA laws. You'd have to arrest literally millions of gardeners who legitimately just want to grow morning glories on their trellises. You'd have to shut down every garden centre, every online seed catalogue, every agricultural supplier that sells these incredibly common ornamental plants. The logistics alone would be impossible, not to mention the political backlash from hobby gardeners and the agricultural industry. So instead, the law takes a compromise position. The compound is illegal, but the natural sources aren't, as long as they're not explicitly prepared for consumption. It's the same logic that makes poppy seeds legal, even though they contain trace amounts of opiates, or coca leaves legal in certain contexts even though they contain cocaine precursors. The law recognizes that you can't ban every plant that contains psychoactive compounds without creating chaos. But let's say you're not just a casual experimenter, you're selling seeds online with descriptions like high LSA content, or perfect for extraction, or untreated, organic, ready to use. Now you're in murky territory. You're not explicitly saying eat these and trip, but you're heavily implying it, and that implication could potentially cross the line into distributing a controlled substance. Several online vendors have faced legal pressure over the years, though prosecutions are rare. Most get cease and desist letters, shut down, and reappear under new names. The DEA has bigger fish to fry than tracking down morning glory seed vendors, but the legal risk exists, however small. For individual users, the risk is essentially zero. Nobody's getting arrested for personal possession of seeds. Nobody's getting charged with manufacturing a controlled substance for doing a cold water extraction in their kitchen. The law understands that these cases would be nearly impossible to prosecute. Defense attorneys would simply argue that their client was planning to garden, and the prosecution would need to prove intent to consume, which is difficult when the evidence is a packet of seeds and some jars. There is one scenario where you could face legal consequences if you're caught with seeds or extracted LSA in combination with other illegal drugs, or if you're involved in something that draws law enforcement attention and they decide to pile on charges. The seeds themselves might not be enough to prosecute, but added to other charges, they become part of a pattern of drug-related activity. Or if you're openly selling extracted LSA, advertising it as a drug, conducting business at scale, then you're no longer operating in the grey area. You've stepped into clear illegality. But for the average curious person who buys a packet of seeds online or at a store, takes them home and experiments privately, the legal risk is negligible. The health risks, on the other hand, are very real, which is the irony of the whole situation. The law is extremely unlikely to punish you, but the seeds themselves might absolutely wreck you for 8 hours. Legal doesn't mean safe, and the government's willingness to ignore morning glory seeds doesn't constitute an endorsement. It's more like a collective shrug. People are going to do what they're going to do, and as long as it's not creating a public health crisis or organised drug trade, law enforcement has better things to worry about. So you order your seeds on Amazon, they arrive in 2 days with free Prime shipping, and nobody blinks. Welcome to the strangest corner of drug policy, where legality and reality exist in separate universes. Here's where things get dangerous in a very unfun way. Many commercially available morning glory and Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds are treated with fungicides, pesticides, or other chemical coatings to prevent mold, extend shelf life, and, let's be honest, discourage people from eating them. These chemicals have names like methylmercury, therum, and captan, and they're toxic to humans. Ingesting seeds coated with these substances can cause severe poisoning, vomiting, diarrhea, dizziness, liver damage, and in extreme cases, death. The problem is that seed packets don't always clearly indicate whether they've been treated. Some list the chemicals on the back in tiny print, others don't mention it at all, and some suppliers specifically advertise untreated seeds, which is basically code for these are safe to eat, though they'll never say that explicitly. Online forums are filled with horror stories of people who didn't check, ate treated seeds, and spent the next 12 hours in the emergency room getting their stomachs pumped, while trying to explain to doctors and parents why they thought eating garden centre seeds was a good idea. The takeaway: if you're going to ignore literally all common sense and ingest these seeds anyway, for the love of God, make sure they're untreated. Your liver will thank you. You're standing in the garden section, packet of morning glory seeds in hand, squinting at the microscopic text on the back. There's a wall of text describing planting instructions, light requirements, and growth habits. Somewhere in this tiny font is information about whether the seeds have been chemically treated, but finding it requires the eyes of a hawk and the patience of a saint. You finally locate it. A small line that reads, "Treated with fungicide." Your heart sinks. These are contaminated, poisonous, absolutely not suitable for consumption. You put the packet back and grab another variety. This one says nothing about treatment, which could mean it's untreated, or could mean they just didn't bother printing that information. You have no way of knowing. The uncertainty is maddening. After examining every packet on the shelf, you find one that explicitly states untreated seeds. This one costs slightly more, which makes sense. Treating seeds is cheaper than quality control and storage that prevents mold naturally. You buy the untreated packet, relieved, but also aware that even untreated is a claim you're taking on faith. The fungicide problem has created a parallel market. Certain online vendors specifically cater to the psychonaut community by selling verified untreated seeds. They can't advertise them for consumption. That would be illegal, but they make it extremely clear through carefully worded descriptions. These organic, untreated seeds are perfect for anyone interested in the traditional uses of this historic plant. The subtext is obvious to anyone who's looking. These vendors charge premium prices because they're serving a niche market, and they know their customers have limited options. Some people grow their own morning glories from trusted seed sources, ensuring they control the entire process from seed to harvest. This takes months and requires gardening knowledge, but it guarantees you know exactly what you're getting. Others just roll the dice with commercial seeds, hoping that untreated means what it says and not treated with a different chemical we didn't list. The consequences of getting this wrong are severe. Therum, one of the common fungicides, is a known carcinogen and can cause acute poisoning symptoms including severe nausea, vomiting, headache, and neurological effects. Methylmercury is even worse, a neurotoxin that accumulates in the body and can cause permanent damage. Ingesting seeds treated with these chemicals isn't like ingesting LSA. Where the worst outcome is an uncomfortable trip, this is actual chemical poisoning that can land you in the hospital or worse. Emergency rooms have seen cases of people presenting with mysterious poisoning symptoms, only to eventually admit they ate morning glory seeds, at which point doctors have to figure out whether they're dealing with LSA side effects or fungicide toxicity, which require completely different treatments. Some online trip reports end with, "and then I found out the seeds were treated, and that's why I spent 3 days in the ICU." These stories serve as cautionary tales, but people still make the mistake, either out of ignorance or desperation. The safest approach, obviously, is to not eat seeds at all. But if that advice was going to work, you wouldn't be reading this far into a script about LSA. So the second safest approach, verify, triple check, and never, ever assume seeds are safe unless you have explicit confirmation. Read every label, research the supplier, check online forums for vendor recommendations, grow your own if possible. The fungicide problem is one of the few aspects of LSA use that can transform an uncomfortable experience into a genuinely life-threatening one. LSA itself, while unpleasant, is relatively safe in normal doses. Fungicides are not. They don't care about your spiritual journey or your curiosity about consciousness. They're industrial chemicals designed to kill living things, and your body counts as a living thing. So before you commit to eating any seeds, commit to doing the research that might save your life. Because the worst trip report isn't the nausea was terrible, it's I didn't check if they were treated, and now my liver is failing. Don't be that story. If you want to truly understand the LSA experience, spend an hour scrolling through trip reports on Reddit, Erowid, or any psychedelic forum. These first-person accounts range from transcendent spiritual journeys to absolute nightmares, and they're all written with the kind of raw honesty that only comes from someone who's been through something deeply weird and wants to warn or encourage others. Common themes emerge quickly. The nausea was worse than I expected. I thought I was dying for the first 2 hours. Once it kicked in, I understood everything about the universe, but I couldn't articulate it. And now I've forgotten. My legs hurt so bad I couldn't walk. I stared at my ceiling for 4 hours, and it was the most profound experience of my life. Never again. Okay, maybe one more time. The reports are valuable because they're unfiltered. Nobody's trying to sell you anything or make LSA sound cooler than it is. They're just people sharing their experiences, good and bad, in hopes that someone else might learn from their mistakes, or at least feel less alone in their own poor decisions. Reading through dozens of these reports, a clear picture emerges. LSA is not a party drug, not a social drug, and definitely not a let's try this on a whim drug. It's a commitment, a journey, and frequently a trial by fire or nausea. You're deep in a Reddit thread titled First Time LSA, Trip Report, posted by someone with a username like TreeSeeker42 or Cosmic Explorer. The post begins optimistically. They did their research, bought untreated seeds, prepared their space, and were excited to explore consciousness. The first hour update is still upbeat. Starting to feel something, slight nausea but manageable. Visuals are subtle but present. Then the 2-hour update. Okay, the nausea is way worse than expected. I've thrown up twice. Why did I do this? Why does anyone do this? My stomach feels like it's being wrung out like a dish rag. The 3-hour update. I can't tell if I'm tripping or dying. Probably both. My legs hurt. Everything hurts. I'm lying on the bathroom floor and I think I've been here for 3 years. Time is broken. Then there's a gap, no updates for several hours, and you imagine them curled up, suffering through the peak, unable to articulate their experience even to an anonymous internet forum. The final update comes 7 or 8 hours later. Okay, I survived. The last few hours were actually really beautiful once the nausea finally stopped. I had some genuine insights about my life and relationships, but holy shit, those first 3 hours were brutal. Would I do it again? Honestly, not sure. Maybe in a few months after I've forgotten how bad the nausea was. The comment section fills with similar stories. Veterans share their own war wounds. Yeah, the nausea is no joke. I find ginger helps slightly, but mostly you just have to suffer through it. I did HBWR once and spent 4 hours convinced I was going to die. Never again. LSA showed me the divine but charged an admission price of 3 hours of vomiting. There's a strange camaraderie in these threads, people bonding over shared suffering and comparing notes on how to minimize the worst effects. Some offer advice that's genuinely helpful. Others offer advice that's completely contradictory to other advice, highlighting how individual and unpredictable the experience is. Occasionally you find a trip report that's genuinely concerning. Someone took way too many seeds, or mixed LSA with other substances, or had an underlying mental health condition that the psychedelic exacerbated. These reports are darker, describing paranoia, thought loops, terrifying visions, or dissociative episodes that lasted hours. They're usually followed by concerned comments, urging the poster to seek help, to not try psychedelics again, to talk to a therapist. These reports serve as essential warnings. LSA might be legal and natural, but it's not benign. It can precipitate serious psychological distress in vulnerable individuals. But the majority of reports fall somewhere in the middle, uncomfortable but manageable, occasionally insightful, definitely weird, probably not worth repeating, but also not entirely regrettable. They paint a picture of LSA as a difficult teacher, one that offers lessons but makes you suffer for them, that shows you interesting things but charges a steep toll in physical discomfort. Reading these reports before your own experience is oddly comforting. You know what to expect. You know that the nausea is universal, that the vasoconstriction is real, that the experience is long and demanding, but you also know that people survive it, process it, and occasionally even find value in it. The trip reports become a form of preparation, a way to mentally ready yourself for what's coming. And after your own experience, you might find yourself writing your own report, adding your voice to the digital archive, contributing to the collective knowledge base that helps the next curious person make an informed decision, or at least a less uninformed one. Because nobody goes into LSA fully prepared, but these reports ensure you're at least aware of what you're signing up for. And sometimes awareness is the best harm reduction tool available. Despite everything, the nausea, the vasoconstriction, the 8-hour commitment, the legal grey areas, some people absolutely love LSA. They're not thrill seekers or recreational users. They're spiritual seekers who view LSA as a tool for introspection, healing, and connection. For them, the physical discomfort is a necessary part of the process, a purging of toxins, physical and emotional, that clears the way for genuine insight. These users approach LSA with reverence, treating it like the Aztecs did, as a sacrament, not a drug. They fast beforehand, set intentions, create sacred space, and view the experience as a form of plant medicine. They report profound emotional breakthroughs, healing from trauma, and a renewed sense of connection to nature and the divine. Some describe it as gentler and more earthy than LSD or psilocybin, with less ego dissolution and more grounded introspection. For these people, LSA isn't about getting high, it's about getting honest. The seeds force you to sit with yourself, with your discomfort, with your thoughts, and there's no distraction, no escape. You either process what comes up, or you suffer through it. And for some, that brutal honesty is exactly what they need. Meet someone I'll call Sarah, though that's not her real name. She's in her mid-30s, works in healthcare, meditates daily, and has been using LSA ceremonially for about 3 years. She takes it twice a year, always alone, always with careful preparation. She doesn't call it tripping, she calls it sitting with the medicine. 3 days before, she begins fasting, eating only light foods and avoiding alcohol, caffeine, and processed sugars. She cleans her space thoroughly, sets up an altar with meaningful objects, photographs, crystals, a feather, a candle. She writes down her intentions in a journal. What do I need to understand? What am I avoiding? Where am I blocking growth? On the day of the ceremony, she spends the morning in meditation, then carefully prepares her seeds, Hawaiian baby woodrose, untreated, organic, from a trusted source. She removes the fuzzy coating, grinds them gently, and mixes them with a small amount of water. Before consuming them, she says a prayer, thanking the plant for its teachings and asking for guidance and protection during the journey. When the nausea comes, and it always comes, Sarah doesn't fight it. She views it as part of the healing process, a physical manifestation of releasing what no longer serves her. She lies down, breathes through it, and sometimes she vomits, which she interprets as purging stagnant emotional energy along with the physical discomfort. This might sound like New Age rationalization, but for Sarah, it's a framework that transforms suffering into meaning. The nausea isn't just nausea, it's transition, preparation, the price of admission to deeper states of consciousness. Once past the physical ordeal, she enters what she describes as a deeply introspective space. The visuals are minimal, she's not interested in entertainment. What matters is the emotional and psychological clarity that emerges. Old wounds surface, patterns become visible. She sees how her childhood shapes her current relationships, how her fears manifest as physical tension, how her need for control stems from deeper insecurity. These aren't intellectual insights, they're felt truths, experienced in her body and psyche with an immediacy that regular therapy or meditation rarely provides. Sarah keeps a journal nearby and writes during the experience, though the writing is often fragmented, poetic, more feeling than coherent thought. Later, during integration, these notes become valuable maps of her internal landscape. She might write, "I've been holding pain in my shoulders. It's my mother's pain. I don't have to carry it anymore." Or, "Fear is just old protection that doesn't fit anymore. It's time to let it go." These statements might sound cliché on paper, but experienced directly under the influence of LSA, they carry transformative weight. People like Sarah represent a different relationship with psychedelics, one that's intentional, ritualized, and integrated into a broader spiritual practice. They're not trying to escape reality or chase novelty. They're using LSA as a tool for self-examination, and they're willing to endure the discomfort because they believe the insights are worth it. Do these insights actually lead to lasting change? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sarah has made significant changes in her life based on revelations from her ceremonies, ending a toxic relationship, setting boundaries with family, shifting her career toward more meaningful work. But she's also had ceremonies that felt like suffering with no reward, where she emerged exhausted and unchanged, questioning whether the whole practice is just elaborate self-delusion. She continues anyway, because every few ceremonies something breaks open, some knot of tension releases, some understanding clicks into place, and that possibility keeps her coming back. For spiritual seekers like Sarah, LSA isn't evaluated by the pleasantness of the experience, but by its utility as a catalyst for growth. The question isn't, did I have fun? It's, did I learn something? Did I move closer to the person I want to be? And judged by those criteria, despite all its harshness, LSA sometimes delivers. Not reliably, not comfortably, but occasionally profoundly in ways that justify the ordeal. At least for those rare individuals willing to treat seeds as sacred and suffering as a teacher. To understand LSA, you need to understand ergot, because the two are chemically related in a fascinating and horrifying way. Ergot is a fungus, Claviceps purpurea, that grows on rye and other grains. When consumed, it causes ergotism, a condition historically known as St. Anthony's fire, characterized by hallucinations, convulsions, gangrene, and often death. Throughout medieval Europe, entire villages were periodically afflicted with ergotism after eating contaminated bread, leading to mass hysteria, visions, and outbreaks of what people believed was demonic possession. Some historians speculate that ergotism may have played a role in events like the Salem witch trials, where young girls exhibited bizarre behavior, convulsions, hallucinations, feelings of being pinched or bitten that could easily be explained by ergot poisoning from contaminated rye. Here's the connection. Ergot contains lysergic acid, the same base compound found in LSA and LSD. Albert Hoffman was studying ergot alkaloids when he accidentally synthesized LSD. The psychedelic properties of ergot were likely known to shamans, healers, and mystics long before modern chemistry caught up, though the line between healing vision and deadly poisoning was razor thin. So when you take LSA, you're tapping into a chemical lineage that stretches back through LSD, through ergot, through medieval bread madness, all the way to ancient rituals. It's a family tree of consciousness alteration rooted in fungi, seeds, and the occasional accidental apocalypse. Imagine you're a peasant in medieval France around the year 1200. You're poor, you're hungry, and your diet consists primarily of rye bread because wheat is expensive and reserved for nobles. This particular summer has been wet and cool, perfect conditions for ergot to flourish on rye crops. The fungus grows on the rye kernels, forming dark purple structures called sclerotia that get harvested along with the grain and ground into flour. You don't know this. Nobody knows this. Mycology won't be a science for several more centuries. All you know is that you're eating bread that tastes slightly different, maybe a little bitter, but food is food, and you're in no position to be picky. A few days after eating the contaminated bread, you start feeling strange. Your fingers and toes tingle, then burn, like they're on fire from the inside. The burning intensifies over the following days until the pain is unbearable. Some people's extremities turn black as blood flow is cut off by extreme vasoconstriction. Ergot alkaloids are powerful constrictors of blood vessels, and in high doses they can completely shut down circulation to limbs, causing gangrene and requiring amputation if you survive long enough for that to be an option. But before the gangrene sets in, before the physical symptoms reach their peak, there are the visions. You start seeing things that aren't there. Demons, angels, spirits, flames dancing in empty air. You might experience convulsions, your body seizing uncontrollably, while your mind spirals through terrifying or ecstatic hallucinations. You're not alone in this. Half your village is experiencing the same symptoms because you've all been eating from the same contaminated harvest. The mass nature of the affliction creates a shared delusion. People believe they're being punished by God, or attacked by witches, or possessed by demons. Religious fervour intensifies. Some people have visions of saints and believe they're receiving divine messages. Others see hellish nightmares and confess to imaginary sins, desperate to stop the suffering. The church offers the only treatment available, prayer and pilgrimage to shrines of St. Anthony, the patron saint of ergotism victims. Some people recover, either because they stop eating contaminated bread or because they survive the poisoning. Many don't. Entire communities are decimated, their populations reduced by death or permanent disability. This happened repeatedly throughout medieval Europe, creating periodic epidemics of madness and death that nobody understood. The connection between ergot and the symptoms wouldn't be established until the 17th century, and even then, understanding came slowly. Fast forward to 1938, and Albert Hoffman is working for Sandoz Pharmaceuticals in Switzerland, investigating ergot alkaloids for potential medical applications. He's trying to create useful drugs from these compounds, which have legitimate pharmaceutical properties that can stop bleeding, induce labour, and treat migraines. During this research, he synthesizes a new compound, lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. He shelves it as uninteresting. 5 years later, he accidentally absorbs some through his skin, experiences the first acid trip in history, and everything changes. Suddenly, the psychedelic properties of ergot alkaloids, properties that have been causing visions and madness for centuries, become intentional, controllable, and profound. The thread connects. Ergot in medieval bread causes random, terrifying hallucinations and death. Ergot alkaloids in morning glory seeds cause intentional, uncomfortable hallucinations and nausea. Lysergic acid from ergot, modified slightly, becomes LSD, powerful, clean, revolutionary. All three contain the same basic molecular structure, the ergoline nucleus, that magic shape that unlocks serotonin receptors and opens doors in consciousness. When you consume LSA from morning glory seeds, you're consuming a natural ergot relative, experiencing a shadow of what medieval peasants experienced accidentally, but with knowledge and control they never had. You're walking the same chemical pathway that's been part of human history for centuries, sometimes as curse, sometimes as medicine, sometimes as sacrament. And while you're lying there nauseated and watching your ceiling breathe, you're connected to every person throughout history who accidentally or intentionally consumed these compounds, from terrified medieval villagers to Aztec priests to 1960s hippies to modern psychonauts. The chemistry links you across time, all of you altered by variations of the same molecule, experiencing different degrees of the same fundamental shift in consciousness. Ergot, LSA, LSD, different chapters in the same strange book about humans and the plants that change how we perceive reality. The Aztecs didn't mess around when it came to Ololuqui. These weren't casual experiences, they were elaborate religious ceremonies conducted by trained priests and shamans, often in complete darkness, accompanied by chanting, fasting, and ritual offerings. The seeds were ground into powder, mixed with water or corn beer, and consumed in a sacred context designed to facilitate communication with the divine. Participants would enter trance states, receive visions, and allegedly gain knowledge about the future, the location of lost items, the identity of thieves, or the causes of illness. Spanish chroniclers documented these practices with a mixture of horror and fascination. One priest, Bernardino de Sahagún, described how natives would become intoxicated and see visions both frightening and comical. Another observer noted that users claimed to see demons, which, from a Catholic perspective, was proof that these rituals were demonic. From the Aztec perspective, these visions were messages from gods like Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent deity associated with wisdom and wind. The ceremonies were serious, sacred, and dangerous. Taking Ololuqui without proper ritual context, training, and spiritual preparation was considered reckless and potentially harmful, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Which is kind of ironic, given that modern users mostly just eat the seeds in their dorm rooms and hope for the best. The ceremony would begin days before the actual consumption of Ololuqui. If you were seeking guidance, perhaps about an illness, a theft, or an important decision, you would first approach a priest or curandero, a healer trained in the use of sacred plants. This wasn't something you did yourself. the knowledge of proper dosing, preparation and ritual context was closely guarded, passed down through lineages of practitioners who understood both the medicine and the spiritual framework required to navigate it safely. You would be instructed to fast, abstaining from certain foods, alcohol and sexual activity for several days to purify your body and spirit. This wasn't optional. Preparation was essential. Going into an ololukui ceremony unprepared was believed to anger the plant spirit and could result in frightening visions, illness, or worse. On the night of the ceremony, you would gather in a dedicated space, sometimes a temple, sometimes a remote location away from the village. The room would be dark, lit only by minimal firelight or not at all. Darkness was important because it removed visual distractions and forced participants to turn inward. The priest would prepare the seeds, grinding them on a metate, the same stone tool used for grinding corn, but reserved specifically for sacred purposes. The ground seeds would be mixed with water, creating a bitter paste or liquid. Sometimes additional plants would be added, tobacco, copal resin, or other sacred substances that enhanced or directed the experience. Prayers would be offered to the plant spirit, to Quetzalcoatl, to the ancestors, asking for protection, guidance, and clear visions. The atmosphere was one of reverence and solemnity. This wasn't recreation. This was direct communication with the divine, and everyone present understood the gravity of what was about to happen. You would drink the ololukui mixture, the bitter taste coating your tongue, your stomach already churning with anxiety and anticipation. The priest and other participants might also drink, creating a shared ceremonial space. Then came the waiting. As the effects began to manifest, the nausea, the altered perception, the shift in consciousness, the priest would guide the experience through chanting, drumming, or speaking prayers in Nahuatl. The sounds helped anchor you, providing a thread to hold on to as your normal sense of reality dissolved. When the visions came, they were interpreted through a religious framework. If you saw a serpent, it might represent Quetzalcoatl. If you saw water, it could indicate emotional healing or forthcoming rain. If you saw darkness and frightening figures, it meant you needed to address spiritual imbalances or unconfessed transgressions. The priest helped interpret these visions, providing context and meaning that transformed random hallucinations into coherent divine messages. The ceremony could last all night, with participants cycling through phases of intense vision, physical purging, and periods of rest. Vomiting was expected and encouraged. It was seen as releasing negative energy, expelling spiritual pollution along with physical toxins. By dawn, as the effects began to fade, participants would gradually return to ordinary consciousness, but changed. They carried with them the insights received during the visions, whether that was knowledge about who stole their crops, whether a sick family member would recover, or which path they should take in an important decision. The integration happened within the community. The priest would help interpret and apply the visions, and the participant would take action based on what they'd learned. This wasn't a solo journey followed by existential confusion. It was a structured, supported process embedded in a cultural and spiritual system that gave it meaning. When the Spanish arrived and witnessed these ceremonies, they saw only devil worship. They couldn't understand that for the Aztecs this was prayer, divination, healing, all the functions that Christianity served for Europeans, just mediated through different plants and rituals. The Spanish systematically tried to destroy this knowledge, burning plants, punishing practitioners, converting populations by force. But the practices survived in hidden pockets, preserved by indigenous communities who understood what the colonizers never could, that these weren't drugs in the recreational sense, but sacraments, doorways to the sacred that required respect, training, and community to navigate safely. Modern recreational use of LSA, stripped of this context, would have been almost unrecognizable to Aztec. priests taking the sacrament without the ceremony, seeking experience without understanding, entering sacred space with no guide and no preparation. They would have seen it as deeply disrespectful and also incredibly dangerous, like handing someone a map to the underworld and sending them in alone without teaching them how to read it. Albert Hoffman is famous for synthesizing LSD, but his work with LSA is equally important and far less known. In the 1960s, Hoffman was approached by researchers who were studying the traditional use of ololiuqui in Mexico. They sent him samples of morning glory seeds, asking him to analyze the active compounds. What Hoffman found surprised him. The seeds contained LSA, along with several related alkaloids, and these compounds were chemically similar to LSD. This discovery confirmed what indigenous people had known for centuries, that these seeds were genuinely psychoactive, not just folklore or placebo. Hoffman went further, testing LSA on himself, because that's what Hoffman did. He ingested carefully measured doses and documented the effects: altered perception, dreamlike states, physical discomfort, and a general sense of inward contemplation. His reports were clinical, but acknowledged that LSA produced genuine psychedelic effects, though less intense and more physically uncomfortable than LSD. Hoffman's work validated indigenous knowledge and provided the scientific framework for understanding LSA's pharmacology. But it also opened Pandora's box, because now Western counterculture knew that you could get a legal, natural psychedelic from garden centre seeds. The rest, as they say, is history, and by history I mean decades of confused teenagers buying morning glories and immediately regretting it. Albert Hoffman was not a recreational drug user. He was a meticulous Swiss chemist who approached psychedelics with scientific rigour, respect, and a sense of spiritual wonder that set him apart from many of his contemporaries. When he first synthesized LSD in 1938, he was looking for a circulatory stimulant, not a doorway to alternate realities. When he accidentally discovered its psychedelic properties 5 years later, he approached it not as a party drug but as a potential tool for psychiatry and spiritual exploration, what he called medicine for the soul. So when researchers brought him ololiuqui seeds in the 1960s, asking him to identify their active compounds, he took the task seriously. This wasn't just botanical curiosity. This was about understanding a plant that had been sacred to the Aztecs for centuries, validating indigenous knowledge through modern science. Hoffman extracted the alkaloids from the seeds and analysed their chemical structure using the tools available to him at the time. What he discovered was remarkable. The primary active compound was D-lysergic acid amide, LSA, along with smaller amounts of related ergot alkaloids like isoergine. The molecular structure was immediately familiar to him because it was nearly identical to LSD, the compound that had already made him famous. The only difference was that LSA had a simpler amide group where LSD had diethylamide groups. This tiny molecular variation explained why LSA was less potent and produced different effects, but the core structure was the same. Hoffman had found a naturally occurring relative of his most famous creation, hiding in seeds that had been used ceremonially long before Europeans even knew the Americas existed. The discovery validated both indigenous knowledge and Hoffman's own work. It showed that the psychedelic effects attributed to ololiuqui weren't myth or placebo, but genuine pharmacological activity from compounds that Western science could now identify and understand. But Hoffman didn't stop at chemical analysis. True to form, he conducted bioassays, meaning he tested the compound on himself. He prepared a carefully measured dose of LSA, ingested it, and documented his experience. His notes describe effects that modern users would find familiar. A shift in perception, enhanced colour sensitivity, a dreamlike quality to thought, and yes, significant physical discomfort including nausea, and a feeling of heaviness in the limbs. He noted that LSA was less visually intense than LSD, producing subtler effects that were more introspective than spectacular. The experience lasted several hours and left him feeling tired but also thoughtful. In his later writings, Hoffman expressed respect for the indigenous use of these seeds, noting that traditional ceremonial context likely helped mitigate some of the negative physical effects through psychological preparation and spiritual framing. He observed that taking these compounds outside of their traditional context, as Westerners were beginning to do, might lead to uncomfortable or confusing experiences because the cultural container that gave meaning to the ordeal was missing. Hoffman's discovery had unintended consequences. Within a few years of his research being published, knowledge of LSA spread through counterculture networks. Suddenly, young people in America and Europe realized they could buy psychoactive seeds legally and experience effects similar to LSD, which by the mid-60s was becoming increasingly illegal and difficult to obtain. Seed companies began noticing unusual demand for morning glory seeds, orders in bulk, multiple packets at once, customers asking strangely specific questions about whether seeds were treated with chemicals. Some companies responded by coating their seeds with emetics or fungicides to discourage consumption. Others just quietly profited from the increased sales without asking questions. Hoffman himself was somewhat ambivalent about this development. He believed in the potential of psychedelics for personal growth and healing, but he also believed they should be approached with respect, preparation, and ideally, guidance. The casual recreational use of LSA seeds, teenagers eating them on a whim, without fasting or intention or understanding, would likely have troubled him. He had unlocked scientific understanding of these compounds, but in doing so, he had also made them accessible to people who approached them very differently than Aztec priests had. The seeds were the same, the chemistry was the same, but the context had shifted entirely, and with that shift came new patterns of use that were less ceremonial and more experimental, less guided and more haphazard, less about divine communication and more about curiosity, boredom, or the simple fact that you could buy them at a hardware store. The 1960s were a golden age for psychedelic experimentation, and LSA seeds were swept up in the cultural wave. After Albert Hoffman's research became public, and as LSD became increasingly illegal and difficult to obtain, some members of the counterculture turned to morning glory seeds as a legal alternative. Underground newspapers, psychedelic guides, and word of mouth spread the knowledge. You could buy these seeds at any store, eat a couple hundred of them, and have an experience vaguely similar to LSD. The results were mixed. Some people had profound, life-changing experiences. Others spent the night vomiting and swearing they'd been poisoned, which technically they had. The problem was inconsistency. Nobody really knew how many seeds to take, which varieties were strongest, or how to minimize the side effects. Some guides recommended ridiculous amounts, 500, 1,000 seeds, which led to brutal experiences. Others recommended methods that didn't work at all. There was also the problem of treated seeds. By the late 60s, seed companies had caught on to what people were doing and started coating their products with chemicals to discourage ingestion. This led to a spike in poisonings, emergency room visits, and very awkward conversations with doctors. The mainstream media occasionally ran scare stories about teenagers tripping on legal drugs from the garden store, but the phenomenon remained mostly underground. Too weird for the mainstream, too uncomfortable to become truly popular, but persistent enough to never quite disappear. Picture San Francisco, 1967, the summer of love. You're 20 years old, long hair, bell-bottoms, convinced that consciousness expansion is the key to personal and political revolution. LSD is around, but it's expensive, increasingly hard to find, and legally risky. Possession can land you in serious trouble. Then someone at a party mentions morning glory seeds. They're legal, cheap, available at any garden store, and supposedly similar to acid. You're skeptical but intrigued. The next day, you and a few friends wander into a hardware store and buy several packets of heavenly blue morning glories. The cashier doesn't even look twice. You pay $3 and walk out feeling like you've discovered a loophole in reality itself. Back at the communal apartment you share with 7 other people, someone produces a psychedelic guide, a mimeographed pamphlet making rounds through the counterculture. The dosing information is vague. Between 200 and 500 seeds, depending on potency and individual sensitivity. Nobody knows what potency means or how to assess it, so you decide on 300 seeds each. Seems like a middle ground. The seeds taste terrible, you knew they would, but the reality is worse than expected. The bitter, woody flavour coats your mouth, and the texture is fibrous and unpleasant. Your friends are making faces, gagging, chasing handfuls of seeds with orange juice or water. One person gives up after 100 seeds, unable to force down any more. Another powers through all 300 and looks triumphant, like they've passed some kind of endurance test. You manage about 250 before your gag reflex stages a final rebellion. Now comes the waiting. Someone puts on Sgt. Pepper's, and you all sit around on floor cushions smoking cigarettes and waiting for enlightenment. An hour passes. 2 hours. The first sign that something's happening is that everyone starts feeling queasy. Not just mild discomfort, active, concerning nausea that has people lying down and groaning. One friend runs to the bathroom and vomits violently, then another. Soon it's a rotation, people taking turns being sick while the rest try to comfort them, or at least avoid thinking too hard about their own churning stomachs. By hour 3, the nausea has either peaked or you've gone numb to it. And now the psychedelic effects are undeniable. The walls aren't just breathing, they're pulsing in time with the music, which has taken on a thick, syrupy texture that seems to pour into your ears. Colours are intense, almost aggressive. Someone's Afghan blanket looks like it contains the entire history of human textile production, every thread a story. Your thoughts are strange, looping, occasionally profound, but mostly just weird. You try to have a conversation about the nature of reality, but everyone's too nauseated and spacey to maintain coherent dialogue. The experience continues for hours, longer than expected, longer than wanted. By midnight, everyone's exhausted, still altered, but mostly just wishing it would stop. The profundity has worn off, replaced by fatigue and physical discomfort. One friend declares, "Never again." Another says, "That was intense, man," which is code for, I'm not sure if that was good or bad, but it definitely happened. The next day, stories spread through the community. Some people had transcendent experiences, others had nightmare trips. Most fall somewhere in between, interesting but punishing, insightful but uncomfortable. Within a few years, morning glory seeds develop a reputation. They work, but they're rough. Not quite the legal acid people hoped for, but not worthless either. A tool, maybe, but one that demands respect and preparation most people don't provide. The phenomenon remains part of the counterculture landscape throughout the late 60s and into the 70s, with periodic spikes when supplies of other psychedelics dry up. But it never achieves the cultural cachet of LSD or psilocybin. The nausea sees to that. In the popular imagination, morning glory seeds become a symbol of desperation, what you take when you can't get anything better. But for a certain subset of seekers, they remain a viable option, legal, accessible, potent enough to provide genuine psychedelic effects, and just unpleasant enough to discourage casual use. A natural filter, ensuring that only those truly committed or truly curious make it past the first few hours of gastrointestinal rebellion. Body load is the term psychonauts use to describe the physical discomfort that accompanies certain psychedelics, and with LSA, the body load is legendary. It's not just nausea and vasoconstriction, it's a whole constellation of uncomfortable sensations that make you acutely aware of your meat prison in the worst possible way. Your stomach churns, your legs ache, your jaw clenches, your skin feels too tight or too loose, or like it's made of unfamiliar material. You're cold, then hot, then cold again. Lying down feels wrong, but so does sitting up. Moving helps, but you're too nauseated to move. It's a catch-22 of physical misery. Some people describe a feeling of heaviness, like gravity has increased and their limbs weigh twice as much as usual. Others report restlessness, an inability to get comfortable no matter how many pillows they rearrange. And because you're also mildly tripping, you become hyper-aware of every sensation, every twinge, every odd feeling in your body, which can spiral into anxiety about whether something is seriously wrong. The body load is why experienced users emphasize preparation. Take the seeds on an empty stomach to reduce nausea, stay hydrated, have ginger or anti-nausea medication on hand, and create a comfortable space where you can ride out the discomfort without panicking. But even with preparation, the first few hours of an LSA experience are often just unpleasant. Not dangerous, not life-threatening, just deeply, profoundly uncomfortable in a way that makes you question why humans voluntarily alter their consciousness at all. You're 4 hours into your LSA experience, past the acute nausea but deep in the body load phase. Your body feels fundamentally wrong in ways that are hard to articulate. It's like you've been placed in someone else's body, one that doesn't quite fit, that responds sluggishly to commands, that sends confusing signals to your brain. Your jaw has been clenched for the past hour without you realizing it, and now it aches. You consciously relax it, but 30 seconds later, you notice it's clenched again, your teeth grinding together with uncomfortable pressure. Your fingers feel thick and clumsy, like you're wearing invisible gloves that make fine motor control impossible. You try to adjust your blanket and it takes 3 attempts to grip it properly. Your legs are the worst. They ache with a deep bone-level discomfort that's different from muscle soreness or injury pain. It's more like restlessness manifested as physical sensation. Your legs want to move, to stretch, to walk, but when you do any of those things, it doesn't help. The discomfort persists, immune to stretching or massage or position changes. Temperature regulation has become impossible. You pile on blankets because you feel cold, particularly your extremities, which remain stubbornly icy despite being covered. But within minutes of being bundled up, you feel overheated and claustrophobic, trapped under the weight of fabric that's suddenly suffocating. You throw off the blankets, feel immediately cold again, and the cycle repeats. There's no equilibrium, no comfortable state, just oscillation between too hot and too cold, with brief moments of tolerability in between. Your skin itself feels strange. Sometimes it feels too tight, stretched drum-like over your bones. Other times it feels loose and unfamiliar, like clothing that doesn't belong to you. Running your hand over your arm produces a sensation that's both familiar and alien. You recognize it as your skin, but the sensory feedback is weird, amplified, hyper-detailed in uncomfortable ways. You become aware of your heartbeat, which feels slightly elevated and oddly loud, a rhythmic pounding in your chest that you can't ignore. Is it actually beating faster, or are you just more aware of it? You can't tell. You consider checking your pulse but decide that would just increase anxiety without providing useful information. The worst aspect of the body load is the hyper-awareness it creates. Normally your brain filters out most bodily sensations, only bringing the important ones to your attention. But under the influence of LSA, this filter is weakened or removed entirely. Suddenly you're aware of everything. The feeling of your tongue resting in your mouth, the pressure of your clothing against your skin, the slight ache in your lower back from lying in bed for hours, the dry feeling at the back of your throat, the faint pressure behind your eyes. None of these sensations are painful or dangerous, but collectively they're overwhelming. Your consciousness becomes colonized by physical awareness, leaving little room for anything else. You try to distract yourself, listen to music, focus on visuals, engage with thoughts, but your body keeps demanding attention, pulling you back to the discomfort again and again. Some people report that the body load eases significantly after 5 or 6 hours, allowing them to finally enjoy the mental aspects of the experience. Others find that it persists until the very end, colouring the entire trip with physical misery. You're starting to suspect you're in the second category. The restlessness in your legs intensifies around hour 5. You get up and pace around your room, which provides momentary relief but also makes you feel slightly dizzy and uncoordinated. You lie back down and the discomfort returns immediately. It's maddening, this inability to get comfortable, to find any position or activity that provides sustained relief. You understand now why preparation matters, why experienced users emphasize comfort measures, why they warn that LSA is not a recreational drug. The body load ensures that. It's a built-in reality check, a constant reminder that you've put something foreign and unsettling into your system, and your body will not let you forget it. Eventually, hours later, the discomfort begins to fade, leaving you exhausted and vaguely traumatized but wiser. You've learned that consciousness exploration comes with a price, and that price is paid in physical discomfort. Next time, if there is a next time, you'll prepare better. Expect S. And maybe, just maybe, manage the body load with slightly more grace. Or maybe you'll just decide that some doors to perception aren't worth walking through. The internet is full of extraction guides, each claiming to have cracked the code for getting LSA out of seeds, while leaving behind the compounds that cause nausea. The most popular method is the cold water extraction. Grind the seeds into powder, soak them in distilled water for a few hours, strain out the plant matter and drink the liquid. The theory is that LSA is water-soluble, so it'll leach into the water, while the heavier, nausea-causing compounds stay in the seed mush. Does it work? Kind of. Some people swear by it. Others say it's no different from just eating the seeds. Then there's the ethanol extraction, which uses high-proof alcohol to pull out the alkaloids, followed by evaporation to concentrate them. This method supposedly yields a more potent extract with less plant material, but it requires patience, chemistry knowledge, and a willingness to work with flammable solvents, which is where things get sketchy. Some guides recommend adding baking soda to the ethanol to convert inactive iso-LSA into active LSA, a process called isomerization. Whether this actually works is hotly debated. The science is sound in theory, but in practice, home chemists rarely have the precision or equipment to do it correctly, and you might just end up with a jar of expensive, mildly alcoholic seed paste. The truth is, no extraction method fully eliminates the side effects. LSA comes packaged with other alkaloids, and separating them requires laboratory-grade equipment and expertise that most people don't have. So you're left with a choice. Eat the seeds raw and accept the full experience, or try an extraction, hope for the best, and probably still feel nauseous. You've decided to attempt a cold water extraction because the idea of chewing 200 seeds is too horrifying to contemplate after reading trip reports. You've gathered your supplies, 200 heavenly blue morning glory seeds, verified untreated, a coffee grinder, distilled water, a glass jar, coffee filters, a small glass to drink from. You feel like you're preparing for a high school chemistry experiment, except the experiment is on yourself. and there's no teacher to tell you if you're doing it right. You pour the seeds into the coffee grinder and pulse it several times, breaking the seeds down into a coarse powder. The grinding releases a smell, earthy, slightly chemical, not pleasant. This powder contains not just LSA but a whole cocktail of alkaloids, oils, and plant compounds, some beneficial, some responsible for the notorious side effects. You dump the powder into your glass jar and add 200 milliliters of distilled water. Some guides say to use cold water, others say room temperature is fine. You go with cold, placing the jar in your refrigerator. Now begins the waiting period, which various sources claim should be anywhere from 4 to 12 hours. You settle on 8 hours as a compromise. During those 8 hours, the alkaloids supposedly leach from the powdered seeds into the water. LSA is moderately water-soluble, so theoretically much of it should transfer into the liquid while heavier compounds remain in the solid material. But theoretically is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because you have no way to test what's actually happening in your jar. You're operating on faith and the collective wisdom of internet strangers. After 8 hours, you remove the jar from the refrigerator. The water has turned murky, yellowish-brown, like weak tea or dirty dishwater. Floating bits of seed material drift through the liquid. You set up your filtration system, a coffee filter nested in a funnel over a clean glass. You pour the mixture slowly, watching the liquid drip through while the seed mush collects in the filter. The filtration takes forever. The coffee filter clogs quickly, slowing the drip to an agonizing pace. You're tempted to squeeze the filter to speed things up, but you've read that this can push unwanted compounds through, defeating the purpose of filtration. So you wait, watching drops form and fall with hypnotic slowness. Finally, you have your finished product, about 150 milliliters of cloudy amber liquid sitting in your glass. This is your extracted LSA, theoretically. It looks deeply unappealing, like something that drained from a compost pile. You've read that some people add lemon juice at this stage, claiming the acidity converts inactive iso-LSA into active LSA through isomerization. The chemistry makes sense. Lysergic acid amides can exist in different isomeric forms, and some are more psychoactive than others. Acidity can shift the equilibrium toward the active form. Whether this happens efficiently at room temperature in your kitchen is another question entirely. You squeeze half a lemon into the glass, figuring it can't hurt and might help. The liquid becomes slightly cloudier and smells faintly citrusy, which at least masks some of the earthy seed smell. Now comes the moment of truth. You've spent hours on this extraction, and you're about to find out if it was worth it. You take a deep breath and drink the entire glass quickly, trying not to taste it too much. The flavour is exactly as bad as you feared. Bitter, earthy, with a chemical aftertaste and a citrus note that doesn't improve things so much as add another layer of wrongness. You chase it with water, then orange juice, trying to wash away the taste. It doesn't work. The flavour lingers, coating your tongue and throat. Now you wait again, this time for effects. According to your research, onset should be similar to eating raw seeds, 30 minutes to an hour. You sit in your prepared space, music queued up, trying to relax and not obsess over whether the extraction actually worked. 45 minutes pass, and you start feeling the familiar onset, a slight shift in perception, a queasy feeling in your stomach, a sense that something is definitely beginning to happen. The nausea builds gradually, and you realise with disappointment that the extraction hasn't eliminated it. Maybe it's slightly less intense than raw seeds. You'll never know since you have no comparison, but it's definitely present, rolling through your gut in uncomfortable waves. Over the next several hours, the experience unfolds much like you'd expect from eating the seeds directly. Visuals are subtle, headspace is introspective, physical discomfort is significant. Was the extraction worth it? Hard to say. You avoided chewing seeds, which is a plus, but you added hours of preparation time, used up kitchen supplies, and still experienced all the classic LSA side effects. Maybe the extraction reduced nausea by 10 or 20%. Maybe it did nothing except make you feel more scientific about your poor decision-making. The uncertainty is frustrating. Without laboratory analysis, you'll never know the actual LSA content of your extraction, how much was lost in the process, or whether the lemon juice isomerization did anything at all. You're left with the same conclusion everyone reaches. LSA. Extraction is more art than science, more hope than certainty, and ultimately just another way to consume a compound that your body would really prefer you didn't. So here you are, 8 hours later, exhausted and slightly bewildered, lying in your bed watching the last traces of altered perception fade like morning fog burning off in sunlight. Your stomach is tender. Your legs still ache faintly from the vasoconstriction. Your mind feels like it's been run through a washing machine on the delicate cycle. Clean, maybe, but definitely wrung out. You've survived your encounter with LSA, with ololokwe, with morning glory seeds, with whatever you want to call this ancient, uncomfortable, occasionally profound plant medicine that humans have been consuming for thousands of years. Was it worth it? That's the question. You'll be asking yourself for days, maybe weeks. The honest answer is maybe. Some parts were genuinely beautiful. Those moments when the ceiling breathed in perfect rhythm, when a piece of music unlocked emotions you didn't know you were carrying, when a thought emerged so clear and true that it felt like remembering something you'd always known but had forgotten. Those moments existed, brief and luminous, scattered throughout the experience like stars in a mostly cloudy sky. But they came at a cost. 3 hours of nausea that made you question your sanity. Physical discomfort that turned your body into a prison, exhaustion that will follow you into tomorrow and possibly the day after. These seeds didn't give you anything for free. Every insight was purchased with suffering, every moment of clarity paid for in stomach acid and leg cramps. And yet, there's something oddly honest about that transaction. LSA doesn't pretend to be easy. It doesn't seduce you with pleasure or dazzle you with spectacle. It just says, here's a door to a different way of perceiving reality, but walking through it is going to hurt, and you need to decide if what's on the other side is worth the pain of getting there. For the Aztec priests who used these seeds ceremonially, the answer was yes. The communion with the divine, the visions, the guidance justified the ordeal. They had cultural frameworks that transformed suffering into sacred ritual, nausea into purification, discomfort into devotion. They weren't trying to have fun. They were trying to access hidden knowledge, and they accepted that knowledge has a price. Modern recreational users approach LSA differently, often without that spiritual container, without the fasting and prayers and community support that made the experience meaningful for indigenous cultures. And maybe that's why so many trip reports end with never again, or I'm not sure what I learned, but it definitely happened. Without a framework to give the suffering meaning, it's just suffering. Without integration practices to preserve and apply the insights, they fade into vague memories of that weird time I ate garden seeds. The experience becomes just another story, strange and uncomfortable, filed away with other youthful experiments that seemed like a good idea at the time. But here's what LSA does reliably teach. Whether you're seeking spiritual enlightenment or just curious about consciousness, your body and mind are deeply, inextricably connected. You can't separate the physical from the psychological, can't have a transcendent mental experience while your stomach is revolting without that discomfort colouring everything. LSA forces you to inhabit your body fully, to feel every sensation, to acknowledge that you're not just a consciousness floating in a meat vehicle. You are the vehicle. and when it's uncomfortable, so are you. There's no escape, no dissociation, just 8 hours of being undeniably, uncomfortably present in your own skin. For some people, that's the most valuable lesson, learning to sit with discomfort, to not flee or fight, but simply endure, to accept that sometimes suffering is just something that happens, and all you can do is breathe through it and wait for it to pass. LSA also teaches humility. It reminds you that nature doesn't care about your comfort or your expectations. These seeds evolved their alkaloids as defense mechanisms against insects and herbivores, not as gifts to curious humans. The fact that those same compounds happen to alter consciousness is just biochemical coincidence, and the fact that humans have co-opted them for spiritual or recreational purposes doesn't obligate the plant to make the experience pleasant. Nature is indifferent. The seeds will do what they do whether you're ready or not, whether you've fasted and prayed or just ate them on a whim, whether you treat them as sacraments or just cheap thrills. Your intentions don't change the chemistry. Your respect doesn't reduce the nausea. The alkaloids don't care about your spiritual journey, they're just molecules doing molecular things in your brain and body. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the value isn't in the experience itself, but in what you do with it afterward. The integration, the reflection, the decisions you make based on whatever clarity emerged during those long, uncomfortable hours. Maybe the real lesson is simpler, that consciousness is strange and malleable, that perception is more fluid than we usually acknowledge, that the boundary between normal and altered is thinner than we like to believe, that plants contain compounds that can temporarily rewire how we experience reality, and that humans have been discovering and using those compounds for as long as humans have existed, driven by curiosity, spirituality, desperation, or just the fundamental urge to see what happens when you eat the weird seeds. Tonight, as you finally drift towards sleep in your comfortable bed, with your indoor plumbing and your modern medicine, and your legal access to plant compounds that once inspired both terror and worship, maybe take a moment to appreciate the strange path that brought you here. From ergot-poisoned medieval villages to Aztec temples to Albert Hoffman's laboratory to 1960s counterculture to Reddit trip reports to your own bedroom, all connected by variations of the same molecular structure, all exploring the same question. What happens when consciousness encounters compounds that change how it perceives itself? The answer, as you now know, is something profound and uncomfortable and weird and occasionally beautiful, something that defies easy categorization, something that's been part of the human experience for millennia and will probably continue to be, despite prohibition and nausea and all the very good reasons to just leave the seeds in the garden where they belong. So rest now. Let the last traces of LSA metabolize and clear from your system. Let your serotonin receptors return to their normal function. Let your stomach heal and your blood vessels relax and your exhausted mind process everything it experienced. Tomorrow you'll wake up sober, maybe wiser, definitely tired, probably not eager to repeat the experience anytime soon. You'll look at morning glory seeds differently now, not just as innocent flowers, but as packages of ancient chemistry, botanical time capsules containing compounds that link you to Aztec priests, and medieval madness, and the fundamental strangeness of consciousness itself. You'll know something that most people don't, that enlightenment, if it exists at all, doesn't come easy, doesn't come comfortable, and definitely doesn't come from a garden centre without some serious gastrointestinal consequences. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly as it should be. Because anything worth knowing probably shouldn't be too easy to learn. And any door to the divine probably shouldn't open without demanding something in return, whether that's ritual preparation or simple suffering or 8 hours of your life you'll never get back. The seeds are still there, legal and available, waiting in their cheerful packets between the tomatoes and the zinnias. They'll be there tomorrow and next year and probably forever, teaching the same difficult lessons to each new generation of seekers, scientists, and the simply curious. Teaching that nature is powerful and indifferent, that consciousness is stranger than it seems, that sometimes the journey matters more than the destination, and that the price of knowledge is often discomfort, but some people will always be willing to pay it. Sleep well, dream strange, and maybe, just maybe, leave the morning glories in the garden where they belong. Because history may be full of people brave or foolish enough to eat the seeds, but it's also full of people who tried it once, learned what they needed to learn, and decided that some mysteries are best appreciated from a safe distance. Either way, you survived. You experienced something genuinely weird and ancient and profoundly human. And that's worth something, even if what it's worth is just a really good story and the hard-earned knowledge that not all doors need to be walked through, and not all flowers need to be eaten, and sometimes the best trip is the one you decide not to take. Good night.